After you finish listening to the story, don't forget to leave a comment about what you would have done in the character's place. Now, let's dive into the story. The city never slept. Its towering skyscrapers pierced the clouds, their glass facades reflecting the endless hustle below. Among the millions of people who called this metropolis home, there was Laura, a woman who had learned to navigate the chaos with quiet resilience. Laura was a janitor at one of the most prestigious office buildings in the city, a place where power brokers and billionaires made decisions that shaped industries. But for Laura, it was just a job. A means to an end. A way to keep the lights on and food on the table for her 2 kids. Laura was in her late 30s, with dark skin that glowed under the fluorescent lights of the office building. Her hair was always neatly tied back, and her uniform, a simple blue jumpsuit with the company logo on the chest, was always spotless. She took pride in her work, even if it was often thankless. She moved through the building like a ghost, unnoticed by most, her presence only acknowledged when someone needed something cleaned up. Her boss, Greg, was a different story. Greg was the kind of man who thrived on power, no matter how small. He was in his 50s, with a receding hairline and a perpetual scowl. He had been the building's maintenance supervisor for over a decade, and he ruled his domain with an iron fist. Greg had a temper, and he wasn't afraid to unleash it on his employees, especially Laura. He seemed to take pleasure in belittling her, often yelling at her for the smallest mistakes, or sometimes for no reason at all. "Laura! What the hell is this?" Greg barked one evening, pointing at a barely visible smudge on the glass door of one of the executive offices. "You call this clean? Do you even know how to do your job?" Laura clenched her teeth, her hands tightening around the handle of her mop. She wanted to snap back, to tell him that she had been cleaning that door for hours and that the smudge was probably from someone who had just walked through it. But she didn't. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. Not with rent due at the end of the month and her kids needing new shoes. "I'll take care of it," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the anger simmering inside her. Greg snorted. "You better. And don't let me catch you slacking off again. I'm not running a charity here." Laura bit her tongue and got back to work, scrubbing the glass until it sparkled. She could feel Greg's eyes on her, watching, waiting for her to make another mistake. But she didn't give him the satisfaction. She finished the job in silence, her pride bruised but intact. As the hours passed, the building emptied out. The executives and their assistants left in droves, their laughter and chatter fading as they headed home to their luxurious apartments. Laura stayed behind, as she always did, to make sure everything was spotless for the next day. It was during these quiet hours that she felt most at peace, even if the work was exhausting. But tonight, the peace was shattered. Laura was in the middle of cleaning the lobby when she heard Greg's voice again, louder and angrier than before. She turned to see him storming toward her, his face red with rage. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. "I told you to empty the trash in the conference room. This was still in there when I checked." Laura frowned. "I emptied the trash, Greg. I swear. Someone must have thrown that in after I left." "Don't give me that crap," Greg snapped, stepping closer. "You're always making excuses. You think you're too good for this job, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, you're lucky to even have it. People like you don't get far in life, Laura. You're just a janitor. A nobody." Laura's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to tell him that she was more than just a janitor. That she was a mother, a hard worker, a person with dreams and aspirations. But before she could say anything, a voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Both Laura and Greg turned to see a man standing in the lobby. He was tall, with sharp features and an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. He was dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Laura's yearly salary, and his piercing blue eyes were fixed on Greg. Greg's demeanor changed instantly. His anger melted away, replaced by a nervous smile. "Mr. Jameson. I didn't realize you were still here." "No problem at all, sir, just a little misunderstanding with one of the staff." Laura recognized the name immediately. Jameson. As in the Jameson, the billionaire who owned half the city. She had seen his face in the news, but she had never expected to see him in person, let alone in the middle of a confrontation with her boss. Jameson's gaze shifted to Laura. "And you are?" Laura swallowed hard, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Laura, so I'm one of the janitors." Jameson nodded, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to Greg. "What seems to be the issue?" Greg hesitated, clearly unsure how much to say. "Well, sir, Laura here forgot to empty the trash in the conference room. I was just reminding her of her responsibilities." Jameson raised an eyebrow. "By yelling at her?" Greg's face turned red. I wasn't yelling, sir, just emphasizing the importance of attention to detail." Jameson didn't look convinced. He turned to Laura. "Is this how he usually speaks to you?" Laura hesitated. She could feel Greg's eyes on her, warning her to stay quiet. But something about Jameson's presence gave her courage. "No, sir," she said quietly. "This is pretty normal." Jameson's jaw tightened. He turned back to Greg, his voice cold. "I don't care what your position is. No one deserves to be spoken to like that. Consider this your first and final warning. If I hear about this kind of behavior again, you'll be looking for a new job." Greg's face went pale. "Why yes, sir, of course, so it won't happen again." Jameson gave him a curt nod, then turned back to Laura. "Thank you for your hard work, Laura. It doesn't go unnoticed." Laura was too stunned to respond. She just nodded, her mind racing. Jameson gave her one last look, then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. Greg waited until Jameson was out of earshot before rounding on Laura. "You think you're clever, don't you? Running to the boss like that? Well, let me tell you something, this isn't over. You're going to regret this." Laura didn't say anything. She just stood there, her heart pounding, as Greg stormed off. She didn't know what to think. Part of her was relieved that someone had finally stood up to Greg. But another part of her was terrified. Greg wasn't the kind of man who let things go. He would find a way to make her pay for this. As she finished her shift and headed home, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change. She just didn't know if it would be for better or for worse. The next morning, Laura arrived at work with a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the previous night's events over and over. Greg's threats echoed in her head, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming. But she had no choice, she had to go to work. Her kids depended on her. As she entered the building, she noticed the usual buzz of activity. Executives in sharp suits hurried past, their phones glued to their ears, while assistants juggled coffee cups and stacks of paperwork. Laura kept her head down, hoping to avoid Greg for as long as possible. She grabbed her cleaning cart and started her rounds, focusing on the familiar routine to calm her nerves. But Greg wasn't going to let her off that easily. "Laura," his voice snapped from behind her, making her jump. She turned to see him standing there, his arms crossed and a smug look on his face. "My office. Now." Laura's heart sank, but she followed him without a word. She knew better than to argue. Greg's office was a small, cluttered room in the basement, far from the gleaming executive suites above. He slammed the door shut behind them and leaned against his desk, his eyes boring into her. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Running to Mr. Jameson like that. You think he's going to save you? Let me tell you something, he doesn't care about you. You're nothing to him." Just another face in the crowd. Laura clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to tell him that she wasn't nothing. But she stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. Greg smirked, clearly enjoying her discomfort. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to me. Right here, right now. And then you're going to keep your mouth shut. If I hear one word about this to anyone, especially Mr. Jameson, you're fired. Got it? Laura's stomach churned. She wanted to refuse, to stand up to him. But the thought of losing her job, of not being able to provide for her kids, was too much. She swallowed her pride and nodded. I'm sorry, she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg's smirk widened. What was that? I didn't hear you. Laura took a deep breath, forcing the words out. I'm sorry. Good, Greg said, straightening up. Now get back to work. And remember, one wrong move and you're out of here. Laura left his office feeling hollow, her pride in tatters. She returned to a cleaning cart, her hands trembling as she gripped the handle. She wanted to cry, to scream, to do something, anything, to make the anger and humiliation go away. But she couldn't. She had to keep going. For her kids. Meanwhile, in the penthouse suite of the building, Jameson sat at his desk, staring out at the city skyline. He had been thinking about the incident in the lobby all night. It wasn't just Greg's behavior that bothered him, it was the way Laura had looked at him. There had been something in her eyes, a quiet strength that had caught him off guard. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled onto something bigger than he realized. Jameson wasn't a man who often second-guessed himself. He had built his empire through sheer determination and an unshakable belief in his own instincts. But this was different. This wasn't about business or profits, it was about people. And Jameson wasn't sure he liked what he had seen. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Sarah, he said when his assistant answered. I need you to pull the personnel files for the janitorial staff. Specifically, a woman named Laura. I want to know everything about her, how long she's been here, her performance reviews, everything. Of course, Mr. Jameson, Sarah replied, her tone professional. I'll have it on your desk within the hour. Jameson hung up and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew he couldn't let this go. Not yet. By midday, Laura's shift was almost over. She had managed to avoid Greg for the rest of the morning, but the tension was still there, simmering beneath the surface. She was just finishing up in one of the executive offices when the door opened behind her. Laura, a voice said, making her turn around. It was Sarah, Jameson's assistant. Mr. Jameson would like to see you in his office. Laura's heart skipped a beat. Me? Why? Sarah gave her a polite smile. I'm not sure. But he asked for you specifically. Laura nodded, her mind racing. She followed Sarah to the elevator, her stomach in knots. What could Jameson possibly want with her? Was this about last night? Or had Greg already made good on his threats? The elevator ride to the top floor felt like an eternity. When the doors finally opened, Laura stepped out into a world of luxury. The penthouse suite was unlike anything she had ever seen, floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek modern furniture, and a view of the city that took her breath away. Sarah led her to a set of double doors and knocked lightly. Mr. Jameson. Laura is here. Send her in, Jameson's voice called from inside. Sarah opened the door and gestured for Laura to enter. Laura stepped inside, feeling completely out of place. Jameson was sitting at his desk, his eyes fixed on a stack of papers in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. Laura, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Please, sit. Laura hesitated, then sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mr. Jameson, I'm not sure why I'm here. Jameson leaned back in his chair, studying her. I wanted to talk to you about last night. What happened with Greg, it wasn't right. And I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Laura's heart pounded. I appreciate that, sir, but I don't want to cause any trouble. Jameson's eyes narrowed. You're not causing trouble, Laura. Greg is. And I won't tolerate that kind of behavior in my company. Laura blinked, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Your company? Jameson nodded. This building, this entire corporation, is mine. And that means the people who work here are my responsibility. Including you. Laura didn't know what to say. She had never thought of herself as someone who mattered to a man like Jameson. But the way he was looking at her, like she was more than just a janitor, made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I've been looking into your file, Jameson continued. You've been here for 5 years. Your performance reviews are excellent. You're reliable, hardworking, and dedicated. But you've never been promoted. Why is that? Laura hesitated, unsure how much to say. I don't know, so I've never been given the opportunity. Jameson's jaw tightened. That's going to change. Effective immediately, you're being promoted to head of the janitorial staff. You'll report directly to me, and you'll have the authority to make changes as you see fit. Laura's eyes widened. I don't know what to say, so thank you. Jameson nodded. You've earned it. But this isn't just about you, Laura. It's about setting an example. Showing that hard work and integrity matter. And that no one, no matter their position, should be treated with anything less than respect. Laura felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had spent so long feeling invisible, like she didn't matter. But now, for the first time in years, she felt seen. Laura's promotion sent shockwaves through the building. The news spread quickly, whispered in break rooms and hallways, and soon everyone knew that the quiet janitor who had been overlooked for years was now in charge. For Laura, it was surreal. She had gone from being invisible to being the center of attention, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. Her first day as head of the janitorial staff was overwhelming. She spent the morning meeting with her team, reassuring them that she wasn't there to micromanage or make their lives harder. She wanted to create a better work environment, one where everyone felt respected and valued. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Greg, in particular, was furious. Laura was in the middle of reorganizing the supply closet when Greg stormed in, his face red with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded, slamming the door behind him. Laura turned to face him, her heart pounding but her expression calm. I'm doing my job, Greg. Just like you should be doing yours. Greg's eyes narrowed. You think you're better than me now, don't you? Just because Jameson gave you a fancy title. Let me tell you something, you're still just a janitor. And you're going to regret this. Laura took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. I'm not trying to be better than anyone, Greg. I'm just trying to do what's right. And if you have a problem with that, maybe you should take it up with Mr. Jameson. Greg's face twisted with rage. He took a step closer, his voice low and menacing. You're playing a dangerous game, Laura. And when it all comes crashing down, don't say I didn't warn you. Before Laura could respond, the door opened and Jameson walked in. His presence immediately filled the room and Greg froze, his anger replaced by a look of panic. Is there a problem here? Jameson asked, his voice calm but firm. Greg stammered, and no, sir, just discussing some changes with Laura. Jameson's eyes narrowed. Really? Because it sounded like you were threatening her. Greg's face went pale. I wasn't, so I would never. Save it, Jameson interrupted. I've heard enough. Greg, you're suspended pending an investigation into your behavior. Effective immediately. Greg's mouth dropped open. You can't do that. I can and I will, Jameson said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Now get out of my building. Greg looked like he wanted to argue, but one look at Jameson's face told him it was pointless. He shot Laura a venomous glare before storming out, slamming the door behind him. Laura let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Thank you, Mr. Jameson. I don't know what to say. Jameson turned to her, his expression softening. You don't have to say anything, Laura. You've done nothing wrong. But I need you to understand something, this isn't over. Greg's behavior is just the tip of the iceberg. There are deeper issues in this company and I need your help to fix them. Laura frowned. My help? But I'm just... You're not just anything, Jameson interrupted. You're a leader, Laura. And I need people like you to help me make this company what it should be. Will you help me? Laura hesitated, then nodded. Yes, so I'll do whatever I can. Jameson smiled, a rare and genuine expression. Good. Then let's get to work. Over the next few weeks, Laura and Jameson worked closely together to address the issues within the company. They implemented new policies to ensure fair treatment for all employees, regardless of their position. They held training sessions on workplace respect and accountability, and they made it clear that bullying and harassment would not be tolerated. But not everyone was on board with the changes. Some of the higher-ups resented Laura's sudden rise to prominence, and they made their displeasure known. Laura faced constant challenges, from passive-aggressive comments to outright sabotage. But she refused to back down. She had come too far to let anyone intimidate her. Jameson, for his part, stood by her every step of the way. He admired her resilience and determination, and he found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. He had always been a man of power and privilege, but Laura showed him a different side of life, one where strength came from perseverance, not wealth. One evening, as they were wrapping up a long day of meetings, Jameson turned to Laura and said, "You've done an incredible job, Laura. I don't think I could have done this without you." Laura smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. But this isn't just about me. It's about making things better for everyone." Jameson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. And I think there's still more we can do. But before we go any further, there's something I need to tell you." Laura frowned. "What is it?" Jameson took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what you've shown me, about the importance of fairness and respect. And I've realized that I haven't always lived up to those values. I've made mistakes, Laura. Big ones. And I want to make things right." Laura's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Jameson hesitated, then said, "I've decided to step down as CEO. I'm going to hand over the reins to someone who can lead this company with integrity and compassion. Someone like you." Laura's heart skipped a beat. "Me? But I'm not." "You're exactly what this company needs," Jameson interrupted. "You've proven that time and time again. And I can't think of anyone better to take my place." Laura was speechless. She had never imagined herself in such a position, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had spent her life fighting for fairness and respect, and now she had the chance to make a real difference. I don't know what to say," she said finally. Jameson smiled. "Say yes." Laura took a deep breath, then nodded. Yes. Laura's appointment as CEO was met with a mix of shock, skepticism, and cautious optimism. The announcement sent ripples through the corporate world, with headlines splashing across business magazines and news outlets, from janitor to CEO. The unlikely rise of Laura Mitchell. Some praised Jameson's decision as a bold move toward inclusivity and fairness, while others dismissed it as a publicity stunt. But Laura didn't have time to worry about the noise. She had a company to run. Her first week as CEO was a whirlwind. She spent long hours meeting with department heads, reviewing financial reports, and learning the intricacies of the business. It was overwhelming, but Laura approached it with the same determination and work ethic that had carried her through her years as a janitor. She wasn't afraid to ask questions or admit when she didn't know something, and her humility earned her the respect of many. But not everyone was on board. Some of the senior executives, particularly those who had been with the company for decades, resented her appointment. They saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't understand the complexities of running a billion-dollar corporation. Laura knew she had to win them over, but she also knew she couldn't compromise her values to do so. One of her first acts as CEO was to establish an anonymous reporting system for workplace misconduct. She wanted to create a culture where employees felt safe speaking up without fear of retaliation. She also implemented a mentorship program, pairing junior employees with senior leaders to foster growth and opportunity. And perhaps most controversially, she announced a company-wide audit of salaries to address pay disparities. The changes didn't come without pushback. At a board meeting, one of the senior executives, a man named Richard Hale, openly challenged her. "With all due respect, Laura," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "these initiatives are going to cost us millions. We can't afford to be so idealistic." Laura met his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "We can't afford not to be, Richard. A company is only as strong as its people. If we don't invest in them, we are setting ourselves up for failure." Richard scoffed. "This isn't some feel-good nonprofit. We are here to make money." "And we will," Laura replied. "But we'll do it the right way. By treating our employees with respect and giving them the tools they need to succeed. That's how we build a sustainable future." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Finally, Jameson, who had stayed on as an advisor, spoke up. "Laura's right. I didn't see it before, but she's shown me that this company has a responsibility to do more than just turn a profit. We have a chance to set an example, and I, for one, am willing to take it." Richard glared at Jameson but said nothing. The rest of the board, sensing the shift in power, nodded in agreement. Laura had won the battle, but she knew the war was far from over. As the weeks turned into months, Laura's leadership began to bear fruit. Employee morale improved, and the company's reputation as a fair and inclusive employer attracted top talent. The mentorship program led to several promotions from within, and the salary audit revealed and corrected long-standing disparities. Laura made sure to celebrate these victories, but she also remained vigilant, knowing that change was a continuous process. One evening, as she was working late in her office, there was a knock on the door. She looked up to see Jameson standing there, a small smile on his face. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course," Laura said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What's on your mind?" Jameson sat down, his expression thoughtful. "I just wanted to say, you've done an incredible job. Better than I ever could have imagined. I know it hasn't been easy, but you've handled it with grace and integrity." Laura smiled. "Thank you, Jameson. That means a lot coming from you." Jameson hesitated, then said, "I also wanted to apologize. For not seeing the problems sooner. For not doing more to address them. I was so focused on the bottom line that I lost sight of what really matters." Laura shook her head. "You don't have to apologize. You've given me the opportunity to make a difference, and that's more than I ever could have asked for." Jameson nodded, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about my legacy. About what kind of mark I want to leave on this world. And I've realized that it's not about the money or the power. It's about the people. The lives we touch. And I can't think of anyone better to carry that forward than you." Laura felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Jameson. I'll do my best to honor that." Jameson smiled, then stood up. "I know you will. And if you ever need anything, I'm here." As he left the office, Laura felt a surge of gratitude. She knew she still had a long way to go, but she also knew she wasn't alone. She had the support of her team, her mentors, and now, Jameson. The final test of Laura's leadership came a few months later, when the company faced a major crisis. A whistleblower revealed that one of their overseas factories was violating labor laws, exploiting workers, and cutting corners on safety. The news sparked outrage, and the company's stock plummeted. Laura acted quickly. She held a press conference, taking full responsibility for the situation and vowing to make things right. She flew to the factory herself, meeting with workers and listening to their concerns. She fired the managers responsible and implemented new policies to ensure compliance with labor laws. And she committed to regular, independent audits to prevent future abuses. It was a risky move, and some of the board members warned her that it would cost the company millions. But Laura stood firm. "This isn't just about damage control," she said. "It's about doing what's right. And if that means taking a financial hit, so be it." Her response earned her widespread praise, and the company's reputation began to recover. More importantly, it sent a clear message: under Laura's leadership, this was a company that valued people over profits. Years later, Laura stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, accepting an award for corporate leadership. She looked out at the crowd, her heart full. She had come a long way from the janitor who had once felt invisible, and she knew she owed much of her success to the people who had believed in her. As she stepped up to the podium, she began her speech. "When I first started at this company, I never imagined I'd be standing here today. I was just trying to do my job, to provide for my family, and to make it through each day. But along the way, I learned something important, that no matter who you are or where you come from, you have the power to make a difference. All it takes is the courage to stand up for what's right." The audience erupted into applause, and Laura felt a surge of pride. She had faced countless challenges, but she had never given up. And now, she was leaving a legacy that would inspire others to do the same. As she left the stage, she spotted Jameson in the crowd. He gave her a nod, his eyes filled with pride. Laura smiled, knowing that their journey together had come full circle. They had both been changed by the experience, and in the process, they had created something truly remarkable. The story of Laura Mitchell, the janitor who became a CEO, wasn't just about one woman's rise to power. It was about the power of integrity, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the belief that everyone, no matter their background, deserves a chance to succeed. And as Laura walked out of the auditorium, she knew that her story was just the beginning.